In Shadows of the Moon, Carmen Neal, daughter of a Werewolf Council leader, grapples with grief and anger after her mother's brutal murder by a vampire. Set against the backdrop of the secret Werewolf Society headquartered within Hotel Italy in Vegas, Carmen trains relentlessly under the watchful eye of her enigmatic bodyguard, Shi McKnight. Their relationship is fraught with suppressed desire and unspoken tension, as Shi, a 6'4" alpha male with mesmerizing green eyes, pushes Carmen to master her emotions and combat skills. Carmen's world crumbles further upon discovering that her own father is implicated in treachery against their kind. Shi, tasked with uncovering the truth, becomes entwined in the web of betrayal that threatens to tear Carmen's family apart. Despite her fury towards Shi's role in exposing her father's guilt, Carmen can't ignore the potent attraction simmering between them. Shi's use of endearments hints at deeper feelings, but he refrains from acting on them, knowing their complicated circumstances. As Carmen reflects on her father's impending judgment in her own fractured life, she finds solace in the prospect of new beginnings. Specifically, the birth of a unique child, part wolf and part Benedanti, symbolizing the potential for magic to bring about positive change. However, this fragile hope is overshadowed by the knowledge that her father faces execution for his crimes, and Shi, though he may have feelings for her, is an inherent part of the process that will take him away. The novel concludes on a cliffhanger, with Carmen's father Alexander, awakening from a dark mental state, tormented by the memory of a vampire named Isabella who represents the destruction of his former life. His thoughts swirl with revenge, indicating an upcoming hunt fueled by personal vendetta. Shadows of the Moon weaves a tale of love, betrayal and redemption within a hidden supernatural society, where the boundaries between enemies and allies blur, and characters must navigate the complexities of loyalty, love, and the consequences of their choices. Chapter 1. Carmen Neal, daughter to one of the Werewolf Council's leaders, was fighting mad. The source of her anger was the wolf standing in front of her in the training facility of the secret headquarters of the Werewolf Society housed inside Vegas Hotel Italy, her personal bodyguard for the past 6 months. She circled him on the mat and he didn't move. He just watched her with those wickedly sexy green eyes of his and waited for her to attack. Damn sure. McKnight, he might be 6 feet 4 inches of hot alpha male, with long raven hair streaked with the most unique red she'd ever seen in her life, and he might even be the hottest man she'd ever seen, but he was such a hard ass. He pushed her too hard and she reacted. She pushed him hard and he didn't. She was tired of being pushed and she was damn tired of him not reacting. Carmen threw a punch and he caught her wrist. She drew the silver and gold blade in her ankle boot he'd given her on their first day in the gym 3 months before but didn't manage more. He twisted her around so that her back was to his front. His body hot and hard surrounded her. You can't fight with your emotions or you'll die. What do you expect me to do, Shi? She demanded. Her mother had had her throat ripped out by a bloodlust-infected vampire seeking the high werewolf blood delivered. Her father would have died too if not for the magic of a witch's coven aiding the society, and she wasn't sure he wasn't better off dead in his present state. She squeezed her eyes shut, her voice lowering to a whisper. What do you expect me to do? You have to find a place to put the pain, sweetheart. Then you have to fight. Sweetheart. He used endearments when they were alone. He looked at her like he wanted to gobble her up. He left the room in moments and she knew he was trying to control himself. And yet, he never acted on what was between them. For 3 of the 6 months since magic had saved her father and pain had driven him insane, and she'd come back to this world thanks to Shi. They'd played this damn game of hot and cold. She couldn't take it anymore. Damn. You sure don't call me sweetheart unless you're finally going to do something about us. She felt his body tense and he buried his face in her neck. You know why I can't. She twisted in his arms and let the blade fall to the ground, her fingers curling on his chest. Damn the council, the guard and their rules, Shi. You know me like no one else. He'd lost his family to rogues as well, and while it might have been nearly a century before, he still lived the pain. She saw it in him, and he understood it in her. You want me and I want you. He took a step backwards and for once she went with him. Don't keep doing this, please. Carmen dash. I couldn't have made it through the past few months without you, Shi. He was the one who'd gotten her out of bed when she didn't think it was possible. He was the one who'd shared nearly every meal with her since, who'd convinced her a month before to go to her job as the PR rep for the 7 hotels the Society used as a cover-up operation. I need you. I need us. His eyes softened. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. I'm stronger because you held me up. And he had. He was such a loner, but he'd opened up to her. Slowly but surely told her about his family, his life. They wanted each other. They needed each other, and still he held back. What are we doing? Sure. A guardsman does not get personally involved with someone he protects, let alone a council member's family. It's a matter of honor and a court-martial offense. Then ask to be replaced. Please, just ask to be replaced. I'm not letting anyone else protect you. You can still protect me. I can protect me thanks to you. A turbulent look slid across his handsome face. We still can't be, Carmen. The council, the guard, your father will assume we started something before my departure. She'd come this far, dared to push him this boldly, and she wasn't stopping. Now. And when I reach 23 next year, when I hit the day of the wolf, it was when a female of their race stopped aging for 50 years, but more importantly, when she became fertile with her mate, if she was lucky enough to find that rare match. But she was that lucky because she knew in her heart this man was her mate. His eyes heated, and the green took on an amber glow. He felt it too. He knew what she did. She was his mate. It was the only explanation for how intensely they wanted each other. Then, he said, a deep rasp to his voice, no one can keep you from your mate. Her chest tightened, throat went dry. Carmen wet her lips. In all these years you've never found your dash. I did. Yes. This shocked her and ripped at her in a way that neared physical pain. Didn't matter. There could be more than one match until a bond was complete. Unless he loved her. But you aren't mated. Otherwise he wouldn't want her. He'd only want his mate. She was a rebel who tried to kill me. His jaw tightened. Instead I killed her. She was appalled, and not because he'd killed her. Rebels were vicious monsters who fed on flesh and death. Good Lord. His life had been filled with horrific pain. Did you think you cared for her before it happened? I didn't even know her. I didn't want to know her. I damn sure didn't want a mate who was a rebel. Of course not. Who would? That would be a curse. Even if she hadn't been a rebel, I didn't want to care about anyone enough to feel their loss ever again. She wet her lips, and his gaze followed the movement. After what I've been through, I can't say I blame you. She hesitated. But it happened to me. Anyway. Her chest tightened. You have come to mean so much to me, sure. They stared at one another, and she could feel him everywhere, inside and out. Her skin was on fire. Her heart was thundering. Suddenly he growled low in his throat, and she was whirled around and pressed to the wall. I didn't want to give a damn. But you do, she whispered. Tell me you do. I really need to hear you say it. Too damn much. And then he was kissing her, his mouth slanting over hers, his tongue pressed between her lips. Carmen moaned with the sweet bliss of it, her arms wrapping around his neck. She pressed into him, unable to get close enough, incapable of getting enough of him. This was what she needed. He was what she needed. She was lost in this man, and she wanted to be lost in him forever. Here she was safe. Here she belonged. Here she felt no pain. Suddenly, though, Shi pulled away, shoved back from her, and put space between them. Carmen was panting, trying to breathe, when the door of the training room opened and her father walked in. A gasp slid from her lips as the rush of her father's anger washed over her. Alexander Neal was 6'5" with long blonde hair, and though he looked not a day over 35, was 200 years old. His presence, even in his current state of barely normal, was intense, but add anger to the mix, and it was suffocating. What the fuck is going on? Carmen didn't look at Shi. She just acted, knowing that though Shi could mask the scent of his desire, she could not. Her father would know she wanted Shi. And in his unstable condition, barely out of the hospital, she wasn't sure how he'd react. Training, father, Carmen said quickly, noting the odd blue hue of his eyes. That said, the magic they swore was out of his system wasn't, and it scared her. We were just dash. Her father started to laugh hysterically, an insane quality to his voice. Carmen blinked in shock and looked desperately at Shi, whose hand was on the blade at his waist. Go get the doctor, Carmen, he ordered without looking at her. A second later, her father launched himself at Shi. Carmen screamed and took off for the hall, shouting for help, until she watched Nico Moore, the leader of the Royal Guard, and several other wolves rush forward. She turned back to find Nico and her father rolling around on the ground, in vicious battle. 11 months later. It was after sunset when Shi stopped at the door of the Benedanti bar inside Hotel Italy, and instantly he knew she was there. He knew by the sweet spicy scent of wolf and woman. He knew by the way his skin prickled and his blood burned in his veins. Leaving had killed him, and each day away had eaten him alive, but it was the only way to be sure there could come a day when he could be with Carmen, and he would be. She was his mate. He knew it with every part of himself. Still, he tried to convince himself that time and distance would change the way she made him burn. He didn't want to care about her. He didn't want to fear for her. He didn't want to find out he'd been destined for a mate who was a rebel and fallen in love with a woman he could never have. But there was no escaping what he felt. Just being in the same building as her, and he was on fire, burning up with need. Long time no see, man. The doorman Lucas Smith was a tall, burly, dark-haired wolf who ensured the humans on the other side of the hotel didn't make it inside the VIP location. VIP because, unknown to the humans that frequented the casino, it catered to the wolves they didn't know existed, most especially the Royal Guard who protected their council. Lucan arched a brow. Where ya been? I thought you guardsmen stayed close to the council and kept them all warm and fuzzy and safe. My warm and fuzzy skills needed recharging, and like you give a shit anyway. Lucas's lips twisted wryly. Hey man, I give a shit. Just don't get warm and fuzzy with me. Not a problem, Shi assured him, clearing the high doorway meant to accommodate the common height of a male wolf, in his case 6 feet 4 inches. Shi didn't do warm and fuzzy, but had an especially intense distaste for the kind of warm and fuzzy meant to hide deceit that had stuck with him the past 100 years, since the slaughter of his family, since this place had become home. Only it hadn't been home the past 11 months. Not since Nico had all but shackled him and shipped him off on special assignment away from temptation and the slammer. His gut clenched. Without even saying goodbye to Carmen, because Nico was right, he reminded himself. You wouldn't have said goodbye. You had to let him do it for you. It was true. Shi knew this. And while Carmen's father had seemed to recover without memory of the attack, the risk of triggering that memory too soon could be grave. Which brought Shi to the question he'd had since Nico's short phone call and command he return. Why had Nico summoned him when Carmen's birthday was still a month away? Whatever was going on had to be big, because Nico didn't take unnecessary risks. Shi paused at the top of the set of stairs that separated him from her, the sound of old-school rock and roll blaring through the wooden floors. Everything inside him screamed to go to her, when he knew how dangerous that was, how forbidden she was. Damn it to hell, Nico, what am I doing here, and why is she at the same place I am? With a low growl, Shi raked a rough hand through his long red-streaked black hair, steeling himself for the impact of seeing the woman he'd left until he knew for certain their future. He hit the bottom step and brought his old familiar hangout into view, the packed stools at the mahogany bar to his left, the equally packed tables to his right. He made a beeline towards the back room that Nico and his second-in-charge Cole favored his skin prickling with the certainty she was near. Sure. He heard Carmen's voice before he saw her, his name on her lips spoken in the soft, feminine sweetness, and then suddenly she was in front of him, throwing her arms around his neck. He inhaled the scent of her long red hair. An emotion welled in his chest, the kind he didn't want to feel for anyone again in this lifetime, but she managed to create in him a hot rush of heat. Followed that emotion, desire ripping through him, uncontrollable in a way male of his age didn't experience unless he was with his one mate. Her breasts pressed to his chest, her lush curves melded to his body. Somehow his hand settled on her back without moving. Oh God, I can't believe you're here, she whispered in his ear and pulled back. I missed you. Her hands were still on his arms, her brows dipping as she inspected him. Don't you dare look like you've committed a crime by hugging me. You were my bodyguard during the worst time of my life. I damn well get to hug you when I see you again. She blinked up at him and he could see the glimmer of dampness in her eyes, her voice lowering. We don't, he warned softly, reminding her there was no such thing as a whisper. where wolves were involved. I have to see Nico. A wounded look rushed over her face. We have to talk, sure. I need to talk to you. I know. When? Soon. He started to turn away, aware of too many eyes on them, but she grabbed his arm, holding his attention, as if he really wanted to be anywhere but with her. Promise me you won't leave without seeing me first. He stared down into her baby blue eyes, trying not to notice how the skin-colored dress she wore clung to every lush curve he burned to touch. They were walking a tightrope that could lead him to jail if Carmen's father snapped again. Sure, Carmen pleaded again. He also saw the desperateness in her eyes, and it was beyond him to refuse her even though he should. I promise. He didn't give either of them time to say more. Shi turned away from her and headed for the back room where a waitress sent him to a private dining room Nico had soundproofed years before. Shi closed the door to the small room barely large enough to hold the small circular booth and slid into it with Nico and Cole. You think you could have picked a place where she wasn't? Cole arched a blonde brow and played dumb. Who are we talking about? Fucking smartass, Shi grumbled and eyed the red leather Cole had on. And what the hell are you wearing? I like my enemies to know I'm coming and that they still can't get away. Nico raked a hand over his goatee. She showed up right before you got here. When I've never seen her here before tonight. It's like she knew you were coming when that's not possible. He shoved a tequila shot Shi's direction. And we chose the bar because we thought you'd need a drink or 10 to get by. Being back. He narrowed an amber stare on Shi. How'd you hold up? Shi downed the shot, feeling the burn, and knowing he'd need another 5 to begin to feel a buzz. He motioned to the waitress to make it happen. Like a wolf in heat, so why I am here before I can do something about it? That's what we're trying to figure out, Nico said. Shi ordered a bottle of tequila because that response from Nico, who always had control and knew all couldn't be good. Cole shoved his shot at Shi and he drank it. Sometimes a wolf's metabolism wasn't a welcome one, like on the rare occasion you wanted to get shit-faced. The leader of the Alaska Royal Patrol says he has information regarding a rebel infiltration inside the patrol, Cole said. The patrol being the wolves, who discreetly police the cities around the world, protecting both the secrets and security of their race while ensuring humans didn't get mistakenly put on anyone's food chain. That got Shi's attention considering he'd spent most of the past year seeking out the very traitors they were now talking about. That absence of warm and fuzzy had gotten way worse since being separated from Carmen, but it had come in handy when dealing out swift justice. The waitress set the bottle on the table and filled Shi's shot glass, and he waited until she was gone to cast Nico a scrutinizing stare. Surely you could have passed on the information to me and kept me the hell out of here for another month. Cole downed a shot. That's where it gets interesting. He motioned to Shi's glass. I'd suggest you drink that before we tell you how interesting. A trickle of unease slid down his spine, and Shi kept his eyes locked on Nico. What's he talking about? Since you've had such success dealing with this issue, Alexander told the council he thought your presence would be helpful. Shi's blood ran cold and suddenly tequila sounded like a very bad idea. He needed to be fully cognizant and ready for battle. And this was headed for a battle, he had no doubt. And he still seemingly has no memory of the night he attacked me. Nico's lips thinned. So it seems. Shi laughed without humor. I'm not buying it. He wanted me back here before Carmen's birthday. If you're right, Nico said, and I believe you are, he has plans for you. Cole snorted. And they don't involve Sunday football and dinner with the would-be mate. Not unless I'm the dinner, Shi agreed, glancing between Nico and Cole. Any idea what he's planning? Aside from my assumption he wants you dead before you can mate with Carmen, Nico drawled. Not even a cent, and believe me, we've been trying. And you can bet he knows we're trying, Cole pointed out. He knows how good and how connected we are, and yet he's fearless. How sane is he now? Shi asked, hoping his craziness explained his confidence, not about to make the mistake of believing Alexander really didn't remember the past. He's convinced everyone he's back to normal, Nico said. Even Carmen. Shi had worked with Nico for 30 of his 110 years alive. He knew how to read between the lines. But he's not. The differences are subtle, but they exist, Nico confirmed. So here's the plan. We need to get you to the testimony at 2 o'clock tomorrow and then get you out of here again without event. Nico plopped a set of keys on the table. I have a place I keep as a safe house. It's off the grid, wired and secure. No one can get to you there, and the added bonus is you can't get to Carmen. Everything wolf inside me screams Alexander is looking for a setup. You don't need to fuck up and get caught with her now, and I don't trust your hormones anywhere near her. You're too close to freedom to be with her. We'll come to you tomorrow and head to the hearing together and walk out with you. Sure grabbed the keys. Nico was right. He had to get out of here, and he had to stay away from Carmen. It was going to be absolute torture, but he had to do. Can you dash? I'll talk to her, Nico said. You just make sure you don't. Mating heat is nothing to underestimate, sure. You of all people know that. The memory of being deep inside the haze, the lethal result of a male wolf who needed to mate being thrown into hormone overload ground through him, and that had been with a wolf he despised. She's not of age yet. Yeah, well, maybe not, Nico said. But clearly you recognize Carmen for what she is already. In anything else I'd bet my life on your control. In this, I'd bet on you not having it. Sure wanted to argue, but he couldn't when just hearing Carmen's name heated his blood. That makes two of us. Control was not his friend right now, and neither was Alexander. 15 minutes later, Sure had gotten directions to the safe house, and he headed out of the hotel on his Harley, plenty skilled enough to dodge anyone who followed him. And sure enough, he hadn't made it a block and there was another bike a few cars back doing a piss-poor job of following him. Sure's lips quirked. Whoever this was, they really didn't know just how bad a fucking mood he was in, or how much he'd enjoy wiping the pavement with them tonight. Sure cut off the highway to a side street and then down a dark alley. He skidded to a halt behind a dumpster, got off the bike, ditched his helmet, and was flat against the wall, weapon in hand, in a flash in all of a few seconds. The other bike rounded the corner and came to a complete stop, and Sure brought the slight form of a rider in a helmet into view. The wind lifted and his nostrils flared with instant awareness. Carmen. Fuck. She could have been followed. She flipped up her mask a second before he was by her side, snatching her off of her bike. Are you crazy? He demanded. You could have been followed. So far we're alone, she breathed, and damn it, the leather pants she wore hugged her body like second skin the way he wanted to. I had to see you. And any second someone could round that corner. Sure lifted her off the bike, holding her close when he should have slid her immediately away from him. You're on dangerous territory. As long as I'm there with you, she declared, sounding as breathless and desperate for him. That realization burned through him and called to both man and wolf in a way nothing had in his entire life. No. She called to him as no one ever had. He told himself to send her on her way. He told himself all the reasons he needed to stay away from her, at least for now. But another part of him said nothing was ever for certain. They didn't know they were mates. They didn't know there would be a tomorrow. Hell, they both knew more than most. That tomorrow was never certain. Sure wasn't going to the safe house without. Chapter 2. Nico's idea of a safe house, Sure quickly discovered, was a ritzy guarded stucco place in the high-end Summerlin area north of the Strip, with Carmen wrapped tightly around him from behind, and every nerve he owned aware of her. Pressed close, Sure used the remote control Nico had given him to open the gate, and then seal it shut after they passed. Once on the property, high concrete walls ensured they weren't seen from outside. Another punch of a button and the state-of-the-art security system secured them for the night. A paved drive took them directly to the garage, and yet another punch of a button let them inside, dim lights flickering to life as they entered. Even before Sure killed the engine on his bike, the special electronic door had slid down and sealed them inside safely. Carmen climbed off the seat, yanking away her helmet. Sure was seconds behind her, ditching his own helmet, and watching her gloriously red hair tumble around her shoulders, his gut tightening at the way the leather she wore clung to the body he'd long resisted touching. Sure, I dash. She never finished the sentence. He was too hungry for her, too ravenous with need. One kiss, one taste was all he'd had of her, and it had been all he'd had to hold him over for nearly a year. Sure pulled her into his arms, slanting his mouth over hers and stroking his tongue into the hot, wet recesses of sweet bliss. Drinking her in, he molded her close, feeling the soft curves of her body against his. I'm sorry, she whispered against his mouth between kisses, her fingers curled on his jaw. I'm sorry, sure. I'm not, he murmured, but it came out more a hungry growl. I'm glad you're here. White-hot fire licked at his limbs, and sure knew he had to act. He laced his fingers inside hers and started towards the door, knowing if he didn't get her inside he'd forget how much he wanted to slowly make love to her and fuck her right here in the garage, which would be bad and wrong. He was driven by so damn much lust and need, he felt like he was about to combust. Carmen tugged against him, digging in her heels. No. Wait. Please. You don't understand. He turned to her, ready to throw her over his shoulder, but her earnest expression stilled him. I'm not sorry for following you, she declared. I had to see you. I need to talk to you. And I want to talk, baby, I do, but right now you should know that I'm fighting the urge to strip you naked and have my wicked way with you right here in the garage. Her eyes went wide and a slow smile slid onto her lips. Before I had to practically beg you to kiss me, and now you want to strip me naked in the garage. Now I'm not on duty, and if you keep looking that pleased with the idea, we really aren't going to make it inside. We should talk before we should talk about what happens in a month. On my birthday. What if we aren't dash? Talking is overrated. Sure scooped her up into his arms, keeping her from asking questions neither of them really wanted to answer right now. She yelped. What are you doing? What I've wanted to do for a long time, baby. I'm taking you to a bed, even if it's not mine, where you really belong. You Tarzan and me Jane? She joked, her mood instantly lifting just as he'd hoped. She'd had enough to worry over this past year and a half. Tonight he wanted her happy. I'll gladly play Tarzan and Jane with you, baby, he promised her. She laughed as he shoved open the door, a soft sexy sound that radiated along every nerve ending he had. Unlike the past where you played bodyguard and Saint Sure? Exactly. I can't wait, she teased. A smile played on Sure's lips at her reply, and he eagerly stepped inside the hallway, where they were greeted by an automatic light. How easily this woman lightened his dark mood. Sure couldn't get them up the dozen steps fast enough. He stopped at the top and took in the large living area, counting windows and noting the kitchen to the left. What is this place? Carmen asked about the time Sure spotted a bedroom to his right and headed that direction. He could smell her, taste her on his lips, feel her close to him, and it was driving him crazy. Safe house, he said, stepping over the threshold to the oversized bedroom. Sweet, automatic light spilling a warm amber glow over the room. Sure quickly noted the absence of windows or doors that had to be custom designed, vaguely taking in expensive furnishing and several leather chairs in a corner. Safe house? She asked, alarmed. Why do you need a safe house? She really had no idea how dangerous her father was, and he hoped she wasn't in for a rude awakening. No, he hoped he was wrong about Alexander, but he knew he wasn't. Sure took her down on top of a king-sized mattress framed with massive mahogany posts. Nico thought me being here would keep us apart. Sure explained, settling on top of her, the softness of her beneath him a little piece of heaven on earth. Nico was wrong, she laughed, a soft delicate sound that pleased him. He brushed hair from her eyes. Nico isn't often wrong. I suspect he knew you followed me and made sure no one else did. He knew we needed tonight. Her smile slid away, her lashes lowering and lifting. Don't say that like there isn't anything but tonight. Sure brushed his lips over hers. Why don't I just stop talking altogether? I can think of all kinds of things to do with my mouth that you'll enjoy more. Her fingers curled on his cheek. But we need dash. He slid his tongue past her lips, stroked away her objection. No buts. Yes, but, she insisted, but she sounded less convincing. You talk, he suggested, smiling against her lips. My mouth is going to be busy. His hand slid down her arms, his lips down her cheek, her neck. He nuzzled her ear. You smell good. Her scent had always driven him crazy, testing his willpower. Sure, damn it, stop trying to distract me. There are things that I want to say to you, and I can't say them when you're doing that. Behave for just a minute. He'd been behaving for over a year. He wasn't doing it tonight, but he didn't say that. Actions spoke louder than words, but he'd let her get a few more in before he made sure she was otherwise occupied. Sure slid down her body, lingering at her stomach and kissing the velvety soft skin there before caressing a path down her hips to stand up. What did you want to say? He tossed one of her boots and then the other, and went to work on his own. She lifted up onto her elbows. I wanted to talk about my father. What about him? He asked, tugging his shirt over his head and flinging it away. Her eyes raked over his naked torso. I forgot. I don't remember you being forgetful. That's because you always kept your clothes on even when I didn't want you to. He wanted her like he had never wanted anything in his life, not even when he was paired with a mate who was already of age. Let's start with yours. She sat up. Wait. Her hands went to his. He froze and glanced up at her, arching an eyebrow in silent question. I'm suddenly nervous. Really nervous. He slid a hand to her cheek. You have no reason to be nervous. He leaned in and nibbled her ear. Not with me. Not ever. He inched her blouse upward and pulled it over her head, and she let him toss it aside. His gaze dropped to her breast, high and full, the lace of her black bra framing them perfectly, and he had to inhale to control himself. He would not rush this. She was nervous. Hell, part of him was nervous and he didn't get nervous. She mattered though. Carmen mattered like no one and nothing had in a very long time. His gaze lifted to hers, their eyes colliding, electricity charging the air. And his hand slid back to her cheek. Don't be nervous. She covered his hand with hers. You have like 100 years of experience. On me. Her voice was soft, breathless. His blood ran icy at the idea of another wolf touching her. Her nostrils flared, her eyes going wide. Don't make assumptions. I can smell them all over you. I've not been with anyone, sure. How could I when I wanted you? Relief washed over him and he watched her relax with him, her shoulders easing just a bit. Good, he said, running his thumb over her full bottom lip, the way he'd wanted to almost hourly for all those months as her bodyguard. I'd have killed any wolf who touched you. There was no apology in his tone. No remorse. He was a wolf. No one touched his woman but him. She laughed without humor. I'm going to justify how much I like how possessively you just said that by reminding myself there's no wolf to kill. He eased her back onto the mattress, framing her body with his. There was so much he wanted to say to her. Like this is how it is between mates. Like she belonged to him and him to her. That even if biology said differently, she was the woman he loved. But he didn't. He couldn't, because sure knew that if they weren't mates, he couldn't fairly ask her to turn her back on her father, or even a true mate who could give her children. I'm going to make love to you now, Carmen, he murmured against her lips, and when she didn't object he tasted her, slowly kissing her, amazed at the willpower her nerves gave him, the tenderness that filled him, the way his need to please her held his absolute need to claim her in check. And she wasn't human, and there would be no pain with her first time, but he wanted this to be memorable. Sure began to kiss his way down her neck, and she slid a hand to his face. Sure. He leaned back to look at her. What baby? I hate I'm the reason you had to leave. You're also the reason I'm back. The only reason he'd had to live beyond dedication to protecting his race and longer than he could remember. He slanted his mouth over hers, and this time the kiss consumed them, the passion blossoming into something raw and real, like nothing he'd ever felt. He traced the lace of her bra with his finger, then his tongue, unhooking the front snap and freeing her breast. She gasped as he filled his palms, lapping at one of her rosy nipples. She was delicate and sweet, still untouched by the hell of wars their race battled despite the loss of her family, and he wanted to protect her, to please her. Her fingers slid to his hair and he inched lower, kissing his way down her stomach to the top of her leather pants. She lifted to her elbows immediately, panic in her eyes. Easy, he murmured, his hand flattening on her stomach, silently urging her to lay down. Relax. I'm trying. I am. I'm just dash. He pressed his mouth to the V of her body and she moaned and fell back onto the mattress. Sure let the heat of his mouth caress her, unzipping her pants as he did, and then not giving her time for more objections. He reached for her leather pants and skimmed them down over her hips, tugging them from her legs. She tried to sit up, but he quickly pulled her legs to his hips and slid his fingers into the slick, wet heat of her body, his gaze raking over her pebbled nipples. She was hot for him, ripe and ready, and he intended to take everything she'd give him. "Do you know how badly I've wanted to taste you?" he asked, holding her. "Stare. How many times I've thought about how sweet you'll be." "Sure," she whispered, and she didn't have to say more. He could smell her nerves, her arousal, her need. When she buried her face in her hands, embarrassed from her pleasure, Sure was on top of her in an instant, kissing her, the taste of her on their lips like fuel on a fire. Suddenly they were burning wild, touching each other, kissing each other, moving together. He leaned back to stare down at her. "It won't hurt," he promised, sliding his shaft up and down the velvety dampness of her body. Sure didn't need to be told twice. He parted her, pressing inside the tight recesses of her body, and then slowly slid inside, inch by inch, careful not to hurt her. She moaned, her lashes lowering, her arms wrapping around his neck. "More," she whispered. "More of you." Sure held her, molding her close, pressing deeper and taking them both to the edge. She shattered around him, milking his cock with tight pulls that ripped his release from him. Time became a blur of pleasure, of her moans, of his, until they collapsed together and lay there for several minutes. Sure brushed a hand down her hair. "Still nervous?" She laughed and leaned up to look at him. "Nervous? Who was nervous?" His lips curved. "Not you, of course." His cell phone rang. "Sounds like my call for the bathroom," she said, and kissed him, her voice softening. "I still can't believe you're really here." And then she slipped away from him, proving she was no longer feeling shy by walking towards the bathroom in all her naked perfection. She smiled over her shoulder at him, all sweet, teasing seduction, and then shut the door. Sure ignored his phone and swung his legs off the bed, about to pursue his woman, when the ringing stopped and immediately started again. He sighed and snatched his phone from his jeans where they rested on the floor, and noting Nico's number, hit the answer button. "Get the fuck out of there now," Nico ordered into the phone. "It's a setup. Alexander has an arrest warrant for you and some proof you're a traitor, selling secrets to the rebels." "What?" Sure demanded, shoving the phone between his shoulder and ear, already grabbing his pants and shoving them on. "What the fuck are you talking about?" "Damn it, Sure, Carmen has to be wearing a tracking device because you have about 3 minutes before him and his personal bodyguards are going to be there. Get the fuck out of there before you don't walk out of there alive." "I'm on my way." He hung up. Sure eyed the bathroom door, and everything inside him turned to ice with the implications of Carmen's betrayal. He didn't want to believe it, but why shouldn't he? Everyone he'd ever been supposed to trust, with the exception of Nico and Cole, had betrayed him. Sure wasn't willing to bet his life that this time was different. He was dressed in 60 seconds and heading for the door, and he was pretty sure his heart had been carved out and left on the mattress behind him. He'd just become a fugitive, and Carmen, be it willingly or unwillingly, was the kiss of death for him, at least for now, until he could figure out how to save them both. "She wants you to be saved at all," a voice in his head reminded him. He had to face the truth. He'd been set up. Maybe passion was all that had ever been real to them, and passion alone was empty. And so was he. Present day. Chapter 3. Sure was hunting a woman, one of the many contracted jobs he and his team of misfit mercenaries had taken in the past 5 years, and nothing, including the fancy shopping mall and abundance of people nearby, were going to stop him from claiming his prey. Leaning against a wall, he watched her slip behind a dressing room curtain, and he waited until he knew she'd be undressed, unprepared for a surprise. Seconds ticked by, and he tried to ignore the thrum of anticipation pulsing through his veins, tried to tell himself the heat had everything to do with the rush of his for-hire contract, and nothing to do with the soft scent of female and wolf insinuating into his nostrils. She wasn't going to get to him. This was business and nothing more. He was the best wolf for this job, not the best wolf for her. He'd taken the job for that reason, because he was the one who could get results the fastest, and everyone involved knew that, him included. Irritated at the hum of his body, Sure shoved off of the wall and headed towards his prey, refusing to see her as anything but that, considering the circumstances he had no control over. She couldn't be more, or his assignment would be compromised. His pace was deceptively lazy, his awareness of everything around him acute, as he made a beeline for his target. There was no hesitation in him when he shoved back the dressing room's curtain and stepped inside the room. Instantly, the ripe scent of hot woman jolted him almost as much as the sight of his prey, wearing nothing but a skin-toned bra and matching panties that made her appear almost naked, her pale ivory skin and sexy curves bared for his hot stare. His blood heated at the sight of her wild mass of red hair, falling over creamy white shoulders that matched the streaks in his own long, inky black hair he wore tied at his nape. Hungrily, his gaze raked over her sensuous body before his green eyes met her pale blue ones in the mirror, the impact nothing less than jarring. Sure was hot and hard and ready in a way he'd only been one other time in his life, when this very woman had almost gotten him killed. For several seconds neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. They sized each other up, the past they shared expanding between them, the heat of arousal along with it. Sure, she asked, her luminous blue eyes wide with recognition, with happiness, and for just a moment she was the young girl he'd guarded, protected, and even taught to protect herself. The woman who he'd taken to bed and wanted to make his life, but not anymore. Now he didn't care how heated she made his blood. He wasn't going to trust her. Not again. Not ever. He didn't care that he'd never proved she'd betrayed him. He cared that there were suspicions within the ranks of the guard about her now. Carmen's brows dipped and he saw the moment in her eyes that she smelled his mood and realized that this wasn't a friendly visit. Trepidation slid across her lovely features, as well it should, considering her father had been part of the decision to destroy him, and he didn't deny his bitterness over that fact. He was bitter, she was on edge, yet unexplainably their eyes held in that mirror, tension crackling between them, and his nostrils flared with the deepening scent of woman and wolf, the scent of their instant lust neither of them could control. Everything inside sure went red hot, and for a moment his gaze went black, the way a wolf responded when he'd found his biological mate. He clamped down on the sensation, refusing to let it or her control him, but immediately the sensation was back, blasting through his body with demand, everything male in him screaming, mine, fuck me, fuck fuck, fuck. Apparently, Carmen agreed with his silent musings because she tried to do just that, fuck him, or rather attack him. She lunged for her purse and had a knife in her hand in an instant. In the process of her reach for the weapon, her stellar, nearly naked backside thrust into the air. Sure leaned over her, pressing it to his thickening groin, molten fire shooting through his veins. His body framed hers, his hand shackling her wrist, and with a quick pressure, point squeeze, the blade tumbled to the ground. He pulled her back against him, their eyes once again locking in the mirror. I taught you to use that blade. Did you really think you could best me with it? Her eyes found his in the mirror again, searching, probing, and damn it to hell, filled with the hurt of betrayal. I can't believe I'm even having to try, she whispered. Sure ground his teeth, refusing to let the way her bottom lip trembled, the way her eyes spilled over with anguish, get to him. 5 years changes a lot of things, sweetheart. Spare me the insulting endearments. Sure, she spat at him. You lost that right 5 years ago. I don't deserve them any more than I do your intrusion. Carmen, sweetie, you need anything? It was a store attendant, who was also Carmen's friend Deanna. Sure didn't waste any time reacting, knowing Deanna as a wolf could smell him. His hand slipped to Carmen's neck. His stare hardened on hers in the mirror, warning her, telling her silently to answer and make it good. I'm good, Carmen said, sounding remarkably, impressively composed when he could feel her pulse racing in her delectable throat beneath his palm. But then she was in the loss prevention department for the 7 casinos the society owned, and seamlessly used to hide their existence from the human population. I'm going to dig around the racks again in a second. Do you want me to look at anything you tried on? Deanna asked. Oh please no, Carmen replied, proving just how good she was at her job of keeping secrets. I hate it all. Don't even think about coming in. The other girl's laughter rolled through the too-thin door. I understand. Honey, be back in a second. There was silence for several seconds and he could almost hear her nostrils flaring, her confusion over what she smelled. That defied the logic that it came from behind the curtain. But then her footsteps faded. Sure turned Carmen to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his body and senses too aware of her, his gaze raking over her ample cleavage and lifting Keep your eyes where they belong, asshole, she warned softly, vehemently. I see you're no little angel anymore. And you're no royal guardsman, but if you think being a mercenary or whatever they call someone with no rules or morals will keep my knee from your groin, think again. We both know you aren't here to ogle me in my bra and panties, sure. What do you want? No bullshit, just the way he liked things, the way he'd always liked her. Get dressed. You're coming with me. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, thrusting the delectable cleavage from the tops of her silk bra. No. Your friend Deanna has at least 2 of my wolves tracking her every move. Right this moment. It's in her best interest you come with me. There's undercover society wolves all throughout this property. If I don't want to leave, I won't leave. Do you really think I'm stupid enough not to arrange a distraction to keep them busy while I paid you a visit? They've been given problems to deal with. Pulled off their duty by Cole, his close friend and the new leader of the Royal Guard who'd taken over when Nico Moore had mated with a witch and joined some magical task force. Sure, might not be Royal Guard anymore still. Technically an outlaw thanks to Alexander, but Nico and Cole sure enjoyed using him for the jobs that weren't politically correct. Her blue eyes blazed red fire. So this is what you've really become? A traitor to your own kind. A traitor. Those words rippled through him, shredding him on the inside in a way they wouldn't have spoken by anyone but Carmen. Before he could think about the consequences of his actions, about how on edge being near this woman had him, anger curled inside, sure, and he crowded her, backing her against the mirror and pressed his fist to the glass. Her scent teased his nostrils, the heat of her body radiated into his, and he wanted nothing more than to rip away her panties and bury himself inside her. She wanted it too, she wanted him despite her distrust, and that only angered him more. He'd been down this path, destined to mate with a woman who would have destroyed him if given a chance, and it had sucked like nothing else in this lifetime ever had. Sure ground his teeth, refusing the connection he felt to Carmen. What the heat between them said they both felt. There was magic that could create false sensations, and it had to be at play. He would not be defeated by magic or another woman, not even Carmen. Call me what you want, he murmured, his lips near her ear, the bitter memory of her father's many unjust accusations when he'd left the guard, grounding him in reality, holding his lust and desire for Carmen in check. But you're still leaving with me. They won't let you get away with this, she whispered. I'm the daughter of an elder council member. He leaned back, fixing her in a hard stare. I, of all wolves, am fully aware of who and what you are. His microphone buzzed in his ear a second before. The voice of his second, Morgan Miller, said, Rebels entering the mall. Fuck. How did the rebels know the security would be cleared? Because they had to know to dare come here. There was only one answer. There was a society insider helping them, someone his client trusted. I'm headed out of the store. Through the garage. Make sure I have a ride. Copy that. Get dressed, Sure ordered, tuning out the headset and focusing on Carmen. Not until you explain what's going on, she half growled. You don't intimidate, don't I? Sure demanded, leaning forward, framing her body with his lowering his mouth to her ear. There are rebels here and they came for the same thing. I did. You. And if you think for a second I won't carry you out of here over my shoulder and in your underwear, think again. He leaned back to fix her in a stare, his gaze burning into hers, his voice a husky wolfish tone. I have reasons to keep you alive. They don't. Her eyes went wide a moment, but she didn't immediately move. She studied him, assessed him, and then abruptly whirled around and grabbed the navy blue dress she'd been wearing and tugged it over her head. It shimmied down her curves and hugged her body the way he'd done only minutes before, the way he wanted to do now. Once dressed, Carmen turned to face the towering 6 feet 4 inches of wolf. With a lift of her chin, still reeling from the sudden appearance of a wolf who'd become a legend whispered about among the society, a lethal killer who took jobs for pay and did what no other would do. And she didn't doubt he was capable of killing. In fact, she'd seen him do it to defend his race and to protect her and her father. What's the plan? Carmen asked. Sure's eyes narrowed on her, and she sensed his surprise at her compliance, when only moments before she'd refused to leave, and even tried to attack him. But he didn't comment, which told her how real the rebel threat truly was. Instead, he drew her hand in his, lacing his fingers with hers, the touch scorching her inside out. "We get the hell out of here," he replied, and an instant later he was shoving back the curtain. Carmen willingly followed Shi into the store. She doubted him for just a moment in the dressing room, feared his intent, but that was before she'd searched his stare and truly seen him, and the wolf who'd once been her bodyguard, and the man she'd once been in love with. No, she was still in love with him. That hadn't changed. He was still her Shi, no matter what he claimed otherwise, and he wouldn't hurt her, but the rebels were another story. They were vicious monsters, and as the daughter to one of the society leaders, she was always a target, and it seemed her safety zone, the walls of the society, were not longer protection enough. But Shi was here with her, and as twisted as their past had become, as damned as his and her father's relationship had ended, he was still familiar and strong, and yes, her hero. She knew it was a dangerous way to think, considering all that had happened between him and the society, but she couldn't help herself. It hurt to know he'd walked away from her, to know that had to mean they were never mates, but still, she trusted him on some level that reached beyond logic. Nervously, she scanned for trouble, spotting Deanna absorbed in conversation with a big blonde wolf. She assumed to be one of Shi's mercenaries since he seemed unaffected by the sight. By the way this other wolf angled Deanna towards a corner, she sensed he was shielding her with his body, protecting her. Carmen knew then that her instincts were right. She had no idea why Shi was here, but it wasn't to harm her. By Shi's side, where she'd once been daily, Carmen moved through racks of clothing, and she could feel her heart thundering in her chest. She could almost imagine the eyes of enemies upon her, the moment they would attack, but she kept her cool, kept her hand on the side of her purse in case she needed the second knife she had stashed there. She always had a backup. Years before, Shi had taught her to be cool and prepared under pressure, and she'd prided herself on doing so ever since. Shi's shoulder touched hers, his big body crowding her against a wall, shielding her from an attack, as he'd done many times before. The memory of losing her mother replayed in her mind, and while it hurt, it also made her remember Shi's training and stand a little straighter. There was a reason Carmen never stopped training to fight after Shi had left. She would not die at the hands of evil as her mother had. Shi could outsmart her, but he knew she had skills, and while she'd worked to hone those skills, she'd kept her intense training behind closed doors with her father. The element of surprise was on her side with anyone but him and Shi. "Stay close to me when we exit the building," Shi ordered as they moved through the men's clothing department. "And if anyone comes at us, I'll fight," she said. "You can bet your life on it." He glanced down at her, his green eyes glistening with approval. "Good girl." Emotion tightened her chest at the endearment he'd once used often when they trained, at the glimpse of the wolf she'd once known and wasn't sure still existed. "You just make sure you kill as many of the bastards as you can." His lips twitched in that sexy way she knew so well, but he didn't reply, and their pace never changed. She peeked at his profile, unable to help herself. He was intimately big, with a hard edge to him to match every inch of him. She cut her gaze and swallowed hard, remembering the random dreams she'd had of him since he'd left, about him with his long hair loose and wild, him on top of her, inside her. He'd haunted her for what felt like a lifetime, and she'd been unable to escape him, but he'd seemed to never look back at her. If they had been mates, he wouldn't have turned his back on her. Or would he have? He'd killed his first mate. So why was he here now? It sure wasn't because he wanted her, or because he'd come to proclaim his love, and how he'd never forgotten her. It was something he wanted from her, and that realization twisted her in knots. They approached the doorway to a stairwell, and Shi pulled her inside the entry, his touch scorching her skin as he pressed her against the wall. Their eyes locked and held, and she knew he felt the connection too. Damn it, why did it exist? Why did she have to feel this need for him when he would only hurt her again? Abruptly, he turned away, and Carmen didn't waste time dwelling on her desire for the wolf who'd left her. She yanked open her purse and grabbed the silver and gold knife she kept inside. The silver would kill a natural-born wolf. The gold, a virus-infected human-turned wolf, their form of rabies. She wrapped her palm around it, ready for confrontation, and watched Shi as he removed a small handgun from under his pant leg she knew would also be loaded with silver and Gold. He scanned above and below them with cool readiness before he glanced at her knife and then back up at her, and their eyes met, seconds ticking by like minutes. Awareness formed and deepened in his green eyes, and she knew he understood she could have gone for his back, but she hadn't, nor would she ever. When finally he motioned her forward, making no move to disarm her, she wasted no time rushing down the stairs to the exit. Shi was beside her in a flash, slowly easing the door open and searching the garage and apparently finding it safe. He grabbed her and pulled her to his side, and with the hard strength of him next to her, and the handle of her blade in her palm, she felt remarkably calm. They made it all of 2 steps inside the garage when an black Escalade rounded a corner and right at them. Carmen jerked backwards, fearful of rebels, only to have Shi hold her steady. "That's our ride." A relieved breath gushed from her lungs as the vehicle pulled to a halt beside them, and Shi quickly ushered her inside. Shi followed her, and so quickly she had no time to turn to face him. The door shut and he tugged her back against his hard body, warmth pouring through her for an instant, only to find her eyes were covered with some kind of cloth. Carmen reached for the cloth, but Shi held it and her firmly in the place. "Sorry, sweetheart, but you can't see where you're going. It's for you safety. And ours." His mouth lowered near her ear. "Leave it on willingly or I'll tie you up." Anger filled her at his actions, at the hard jolt of reality they created. He'd come here with an agenda she now had to face. "Why do I think you'd like that?" "Actually," he murmured, "I prefer you both, free of restraints and willing. But I somehow doubt that's how I'll keep you." "Then you must believe I won't like what comes next," she said, aware of the sensual heat in his words that were both seductive and somehow hard and unbending. His lips brushed her ear. "You won't, Angel, but if it's any consolation, I've decided I won't either." Chapter 4. "But you're going to do whatever you came to do anyway," Shi heard Carmen whisper before pulling away from him, and he knew he was in trouble when it was all he could do not to pull her back, to explain. He didn't explain himself. Not for the past 5 years that had changed him, hardened him, but he wanted to now. Yeah, he was in trouble. Big screw, deep shit kind of trouble. And he was on fire, hot for Carmen in the worst of ways, and the fact everything inside him was again screaming mine didn't help. He'd convinced himself they weren't mates. The chance of finding 2 mates in one lifetime was once in a non-existent blue moon, almost unheard of after all. But then most wolves were off the market after finding their biological mate, he reminded himself. Carmen turned towards him, crossing her arms in front of her, her skirt rising high on her long, shapely legs, and his groin tightened. She was beautiful, and she always had been. But she was so much more. She meant something to him. The idea that she, like his previous intended mate, could be aligned with or even acting with someone betraying their race destroyed him, not Carmen. He couldn't deal with the loss of the good he'd always believed she represented, and the idea set free something fierce and explosive that rose inside him. Shi snapped and pulled Carmen to him, pressed her against the seat and framed her body with his. He yanked down the blindfold, wanting to see her eyes, where magic couldn't disguise the truth. "I don't have a choice but to do what I came here to do," he growled low in his throat. "Your father is selling society secrets to the rebels." She gasped. "No. He wouldn't do that." Her hand settled on his chest, scorching him through his t-shirt. "No. You know he wouldn't do that." "He is, Carmen. I have pictures and proof. The only questions I have are why. What's the end damage in game, and are you helping him?" She gaped. "Me? You think I'm selling secrets to the rebels?" She shook her head. "No. You know me, sure. You know me like no one else but my father does. I wouldn't do that." Her fingers curled around his shirt. "You're an elder wolf. You can smell a lie. You can smell the truth. I'm not betraying the society or anyone else. You know I'm telling the truth. The rebels have the Benedanti helping them, Carmen," he said, talking about the immortal offspring of wolves and a witch from many centuries before, who, like them, were split between good and evil. There is magic that can hide a lie, and they use it. And the idea that it might create a false mating heat only set him further on edge. "We have Benedanti helping us too. Nico's wife is Benedanti, and only his mate by magic. Surely she can test me." Nico's maid is about to give birth to their first child, or she'd gladly do. So, Nico is, however, sending someone to test you, Carmen. Someone very powerful. Good, she whispered. Then you have to believe me. The words, laced with the pain of his distrust, ripped through him. He didn't want to hurt Carmen. He didn't want to believe bad of her. Don't you think I want to trust you? Her turbulent stare searched his face. I know you do, sure. And I know why. You can't. I understand, but it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. She did know. She was one of the few in his life with knowledge of his past. And the betrayal that had ripped him from the folds of the society who'd been his family, when his own had been long ago killed in war. And deep down he knew her, that she was good and kind and honest. He'd stayed away to give her a chance at happiness, to keep her from living a life underground, disgraced. But he had to be careful, tread cautiously. There was too much on the line. Carmen dash. Her fingers went to his lips, soft and gentle in a way he had not been touched in far too long, perhaps since this woman had graced his life. Don't, she whispered. Don't let guilt eat you up. You're doing what you have to do for the right reasons. I know what they are, and I know what you've been through. But know this sure. When I prove my innocence, and I plan to prove my father's. His heart thundered in his chest at her willingness to fight for someone she loved, who wasn't going to deserve her effort. He knew how alone she really was, how much her father meant to her, how certain her getting hurt was before this was over. And he knew staying away had been right. Making her choose between him and Alexander would never have worked. He reached up to stroke her cheek. Carmen dash. She snatched his hand. Don't comfort me until you trust me. Then, well then, I might let you, that is, if I decide I trust you. He wanted to tell her she could trust him. He wanted to trust her. But life had taught him hard lessons, and he couldn't blindly ignore the real threat to the society. How do I know this Benedante you plan to have checked me out isn't a rebel? She asked. How do I know the rebels didn't hire you, and this is a trick to extract secrets from the society? Sure took the blow of her questions with a hard stare, but he felt their hard impact. His nostrils flared, seeking the truth beneath her words, and he smelled none of the manipulative intent that could have been present. Instead, he scented her fear that he would really betray her, not the other way around. Damn it to hell, how had they gone from where they'd once been to here? He yanked his cell phone from his belt and punched a button before putting it to his ear. It's sure, he said when Cole answered. Do you have her? Cole asked, and Sure watched Carmen's eyes widen with surprise at the voice of the Royal Guard's leader. Her exceptional hearing had already identified. Yes, Sure confirmed. I have her. She wants confirmation I'm not working for the rebels. He was silent a moment. She's within hearing distance? Then she already knows what she needs to know. I hired you. Carmen reached for the phone, and Sure wasn't inclined to deny her. He let her have it. My father is not a traitor, Carmen said vehemently the instant she had it to her mouth. There's some explanation for whatever you think you know. Then help us help your father, Sure heard Cole tell her. Do what he asks you to do. Carmen's eyes lifted to Sure's. Why go outside the guard? Cole was silent several long beats. I have my reasons. Tell Sure I'll call him later. The line went dead. Carmen handed him back the phone, and Sure slid it onto his belt. For a moment, the two of them just stared at one another, and he felt their past collide with their present, their uncertain future as well. He'd never felt so tormented in his life, not even with Susan. Absolutely not with Susan. He'd felt mating heat and obligation with Susan. What he felt for Carmen was so much more. They had history, a relationship, a bond that was powerful enough to never be forgotten, to keep him looking out for her, protecting her from a distance despite her father's hatred of him, despite being certain she would feel the same. But she didn't. He knew that now. She hadn't judged him or turned her contempt on him when, truth be told, he had. He hated himself for letting Susan nearly destroy him. Suddenly Sure needed space. He needed to think. He needed to get his body under control before he forgot his duty over a woman again. Not just any woman, he told himself. This is Carmen, whose father is a traitor. Sure shoved away from Carmen and distanced himself from her, leaning against the door of the truck opposite her, and it was all he could do to keep a stony face, to control his emotions, to appear as if he was casually watching her when he felt like he was going to climb out of his own skin. She turned to sit against her door, facing him, tugging her dress down before wetting that lush mouth of hers and studying him. Her gaze flickered towards the front of the truck and back to him. What about my blindfold? The Benedanti can erase your memory. The blindfold was just extra precaution. I see, she said after a momentary pause, her delicate brows furrowing. Does that mean you can send me back to the society without the knowledge of you ever being here? Yes. Is that what you plan to do? I haven't decided. She stared at him a long moment and then laughed without humor. It was the closest thing to bitter he'd ever heard from her, despite all she'd been through. Her gaze cut to the ceiling and she laughed without humor. At least you're honest. Sure opened his mouth to respond and snapped it shut. He trusted his driver, Jacob, like he trusted no one else he employed, but this was a conversation for behind closed doors. We'll talk when we get to our destination. After the Benedanti interrogate me. When we're alone. Right. When we're alone having a conversation I might have erased. Sure did what he would never do with the group of misfits he employed who required a strong leader to maintain control. He broke eye contact with Carmen and let his head fall back against the window, his lashes lowering, his gut twisted with the knowledge that no matter how much he wanted to tell her he wouldn't clean her memory, he couldn't do that. Hell, he wanted to tell her everything was going to be okay and make her feel better, but he didn't have it in him to lie to her when he knew what she didn't. Once he'd made sure he'd discovered her father's secrets and done damage control to protect the society, her father would be sentenced for his crimes. Her father would be charged and punished, and the punishment for a council member betraying his people was death. In this case, a discreet execution that would appear an accident, meant to maintain the integrity of the council. Sure couldn't save Alexander even if he wanted to, but his involvement in proving Carmen's father guilty was something she'd never be able to forgive him for, no matter how much she might see the truth of her father's actions. It was a natural. Alexander was her father and sure would again be the enemy. Sure, Carmen said softly, drawing his attention, her voice quivering, and something in her tone warned him he wasn't going to like what came next even before she added, you can erase my memories but you won't erase the betrayal. Deep down, if you wipe my memories, I'll still know what you did to me. She paused, her teeth scraping her bottom lip. Whatever that might be. She turned away from him and faced the front. Everything was most definitely not going to be okay. Chapter 5. It was a good 30 minutes of writing later, and Carmen was mentally replaying everything her father had done in the past few months, trying to find anything that stood out as odd, but there was nothing. She still lived inside the Hotel Italy, close to him, but truly she hadn't spent much quality time with him in almost a year. She'd thought life had gotten busy, her career more demanding, but was there more to it than that? She was angry. She wasn't sure at who, only that her life was falling apart. And the only two people who'd felt like family, her father and Sher, were both in jeopardy of being stripped away from her forever. Deep down she'd always hoped for, she'd thought somehow, someway they'd both be in her world. It was a fairy tale story, but for years she'd gone to bed at night dreaming that tale. Now she realized she had never really given up on it, even if she hadn't allowed herself to think about it anymore. Carmen stared out her window, unable to look at Sher, trying to suppress the emotions expanding inside her, knowing he could feel what she did, and staring at the highway without seeing it. At some point she told herself Sher wasn't her mate, or he wouldn't have been able to stay away. So why now, in his presence, did she feel they were mates, clear to her soul? Why did this fire between them exist? Why did it resemble the mating heat she'd always heard about and yearned for with Sher? Her parents had loved each other, lived for each other, and so did every other mated couple she knew. But Sher had been matched with a rebel and they'd hated each other. So being mates meant what? Hot sex with another wolf who may mean nothing else to you? Why did she want to be mated then? No thank you. If she couldn't have love, she'd be alone. The vehicle hit a gravel road and Carmen glanced up to find they were pulling into a secluded ranch property just outside the city limits. Her gaze cut to the left to find Sher still propped against the window, staring at her. She squeezed her eyes shut against his probing inspection and refocused on the huge White House and the three large warehouse-looking buildings off in the distance beyond it. This was where Shi housed his mercenaries or whatever they were. This was his world. Carmen glanced at the driver she barely noticed until now, who had wavy brown hair and strong forearms, with sunglasses hiding his face. She wondered what he thought of what he'd heard in the back seat, but imagined he'd been paid well enough to not care. Could my father be controlled by magic? She asked without looking at Shi. He had magic used on him to stop him from dying when my mother died. He'll live his life with a spell cast on him. How can we know that hasn't made him susceptible in some way? This was where he had to tell her things she wouldn't want to hear. The leader of the Benedanti, Ariel, he explained, who I know you know from his involvement with Nico and the guard, says that the magic used to stop the death of a living creature isn't used for a reason. It's poison. It eats away at the person and turns them into something you don't recognize. For some it would be quickly. For another, someone ancient and powerful like your father, the drain of his true self could be much slower, but not avoidable. She shook her head. No, that's not possible. I know. I'd feel it. Alexander won't let you see or feel anything he doesn't want you to. You have to know this. The Escalade pulled to a stop and he felt the desperation rising inside. Carmen, maybe the rebels are threatening the society, or maybe they are threatening me. They did show up at the mall today. After losing my mother. Maybe he's afraid of losing me. Which is why you're here, Carmen. She paled instantly. Because you're going to use me against him, just like the rebels might be. Let's go inside and talk. Tears prickled at her eyes and she was instantly angry at her weakness at the world. You mean let's go inside so I can be interrogated? Sure. Let's. She turned away and shoved open the door and climbed out of the truck. Shi was by her side in a flash, the driver not far behind him, and she didn't wait to be ordered towards the building. Carmen marched forward, seeking an escape from Shi when there was nowhere to go, but she didn't miss the way the other wolf trailed in his wake. Get me an update on the rebels, Shi ordered the other wolf. And make sure Cole knows what happened back there. Carmen kept moving forward, thankful Shi was clearing the way for them to be alone, or so she hoped. Shi was king here, she sensed that, and she was the king's captive. It scared her that on some level being his captive appealed to her. How much she wanted him when he was using her to get to her father. He wasn't a traitor. He was working for the guard, but he wasn't her protector anymore either, her confidant. He was, however, her mate, and even with that bond he'd ignored her for 5 years. That hurt. This hurt. She was so full of hurt and anger she thought she might explode. She needed to be alone with Shi so she could let loose away from his pack where she didn't dare challenge him. Just when Carmen thought she might make it to the porch and escape further scrutiny, a tall man moved from the side of the porch, leaned against the railing, watching her approach with a cold as ice stare. She could see the flare of his nostrils, knew he smelled her anger, mixed with the damnable lust for his leader she couldn't control, and it made her uneasy. He made her uneasy in a way the driver had not. The driver respected Shi. This wolf, he would rip out Shi's throat when he wasn't looking. He was looking for a reason to challenge Shi. She smelled it all over him, and if rumors were true and Shi hired dangerous wolves no one but him could control, she had reason to be worried. Shi was suddenly by her side, his hand on her elbow. He lifted his chin at the other wolf, a silent command, and the wolf's posture eased, his entire demeanor shifting and turning to respect. Relief washed over Carmen as the wolf headed down the stairs, away from them by the time Carmen and Shi were on their way up. Shi opened the door for Carmen and she didn't look at him. She entered aware of him on every possible level, her skin heating and her body aching. That she couldn't stop her reaction, her desire, only made her more angry. The instant she cleared the entry, her nostrils flared with the confirmation they were alone. Carmen whirled on him the instant the door was shut. All this time, Shi. All this time you stayed away from me, and you dare to come to me now to use me. If I didn't come for you now, someone else would have, and they wouldn't have cared how you were treated. Oh, so this was a favor. You'll interrogate me so no one else will. Gee, thanks. I'm sure you'll be gentle. I guess this ranks right up there with a guy's version of a mercy fuck. Suddenly she was pressed against the wall, his hard body framing hers, his breath warm near her lips. I stayed away to protect you just like I'm here. Now to protect you. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Protect me? Is that what making me feel like I didn't matter was? Protecting me. A low growl slid from deep in his chest before his mouth slanted down over hers, his tongue sweeping into her mouth with a possessive claiming that had her moaning in response. Instantly consumed, she barely remembered her arms sliding around his neck. Only that she was kissing him back, molding her body to his, desperate as she had never been before. There was nothing but her need for this wolf and a burn that hurt to her soul. There was only now, without consequence, without thought of what this meant, what tomorrow would bring. Carmen simply needed to feel sure inside her, filling her, completing her.